Alright, Pete, what do? I just finished reading Don Preston book, Misplaced Minds, Colossians 3, verses 1 through 2, and Dispensationalism. And so his point's based on the Colossians 3, if they were raised with Christ, seek those things that are above Christ. That's where Christ is, sitting at the right hand of God. Sit your mind on things above, not on things of the earth. For you died, and your life is hidden with Christ in God. So he's saying he's saying focus not on the land. So when they say focus not on the world, people would be like, oh, the Israelites, they wasn't focused on the world, and so on and so forth. And there's some truth to that. That's what the Sabbath was, because they didn't get into the promised land of their own regard. That's what the Sabbath is. With his strong hand, he brought you in there. So you have to stop striving and realize that it's he who determines your fate to begin with, that he would reward you ever so much more for the faith of a mustard seed, that it wasn't the, you could take a break. It wasn't about what you could earn. It's about faith. So there was truth to that. But the especially as it goes on to the Pharisees, which Christians always miss this because they don't have the Pharisees book, which is the Talmud, and they had the oral law before the Talmud was ever written, but it wasn't um, spelled out, and so people often think about angelology. That probably the one word out of the entire Colossians 2, being the people who he talking about, these false teachers. So they would take the angelology and then they would run with that and say it was these pagans, and they would also take the rudimentary elements. But we can see in Galatians that people were trying to bring them back under the yoke, and no, they wasn't originally under the yoke. It wasn't like yoke, not yoke, yoke again. It was not yoke, not yoke with Jesus, the light yoke, and then the yoke. So that's the confusing part. And also, what's confusing is that if we look at Hebrews 6:2, there was a lot of these parts of the cultural aspects of the Pharisees that was already part and parcel of the religion. Uh, Not really part and parcel, but yeah, you could say that they had their own part and their own parcel. Um, but like there was the Sadducees, and they didn't really. They were more like based on the Hasmoneans, and over the period of time, they got kicked out for the Pharisees. That came to power, and some of the later editions are actually some of my favorites. Like there is a lot of good lessons in Proverbs, a lot of good sayings and what have you. There's some things in Deuteronomy that are even better than Exodus. Um, a couple things that are worse, but some of the later parts I do happen to favor more. There's more of a spiritual aspect, and you get these more hints of the resurrection and stuff like that. So I owe great deal of gratitude to the Scythian, but I wanted to get into what I was trying to say with this here, and that was about the vine, because I can't believe I'm having to say this. When people talk about Romans 11, they say, "Don't boast against the root. Don't boast against the root," and they people who the dispensationalists would say needs to be circumcised and needs to get the temple sacrifices and needs to do all these things, when really Paul's saying that don't focus on these things because here this is really interesting from Josephus, if I may divert for a minute. It's a the veils. This is about the veil that was torn, and it says the veils too that were composed of four things. They declared four elements. For the fine linen was to proper signify the earth. That was the white. They had lots of white in the vestments, and the flax grows out of the earth. The purple signifies the sea because the color was dyed with the blood of the sea. So purple, blue, scarlet, we know those are the priestly vestments and the priestly colors. So it turns out that these are based on the rudiments of the earth, the the stoichi of the cosmos or whatever. Like the blue is to signify the air. These just like the pagans, these people were too caught up in these physical things, and you might in the pagans might call them spirits, but to Yehudim it might have been more these are elements aspects of the divine that he put onto earth or whatever and manipulate in such a way that these aren't divine elements or whatever, but so it says the breastplate was made to resemble. This is into antiquities. The breastplate was made to resemble the earth, and girdle represented the ocean, and sardonyx and the sun and the moon, and 12 stones for the months. The 12 stones for the months, the zodiac. And when you do the archaeology from this time period of these people, it's the same thing. It's the zodiac and what have you. And this is what Daniel learned of. Daniel, he was learned in the school of the astronomers and what have you. And, Moses was raised in Egypt, and Joseph spent most of his life in Egypt. And um, so what was the point? So the point was that these dispensationalists are missing what Paul's saying, and I agree with Don's point that this was very much not a pagan, like if you look at Colossians, Philippians, all the genuine Pauline letters, Romans, he's telling these Gentiles, don't let these Judaizers throw you under the yoke. You're finding all this truth in Jesus, but that doesn't mean you need to, go under and follow the law of Moses. We also know that the Yehudim are saved in the same way, contrary to what anybody tell you. But that's not the point of this right now. But so if we look at Deuteronomy 30 and 18, it says, I tell you now that you will certainly perish. You will not have long life on the land which you are crossing the Jordan to enter and occupy. So this is the choice. They wouldn't have much time on the land if they didn't keep the law of Moses. And if we fast forward to after they didn't keep the law of Moses, this was so many 600 years later, like the Amorites had 600 years for this area, but this we see this kind of like episodic narrative where we get this glimpse in time that there was all this thing, all this lessons and trials that was going on with the Amorites that they didn't make, and now it's time for the Israelites. So it's really not like all time. It's we have this time period with the Israelites that was a type and a shadow that when his true people came, they would have a model for what to learn from. And so it said Isaiah 5 and 5. Okay, so back it up. There's already been some talk. Moses say that, that he had basically grabbed a vine from Egypt and planted it, over in Canaan. And so in Isaiah 5:5, it say, now I will let you know what I mean to do to my vineyard. So this is also a symbology from Joshua and what have you, that his people was like his vineyard. He was cultivating it. This was a kind of a motif, that started off where he brought them over from Egypt and planted them, and then he cultivated it. But say, what more to do with my vineyard that I had not done? Why, when I look at the crop of grapes, did it bring forth wild grapes? So that's what the pagans, the wild grapes. And so when it says, now I will let you know what I mean to do to the vineyard, take away its hedge, give it to the grazing, break through its wall, let it be trampled. But I thought Shalmanazar never. I thought Sennacherib never made a rampart or never conquered the walls or whatever. But even that was just supposed to be a message for, what we see in Revelation and the Gog and Magog war. But the point is that, he say he going to, take away its hedge of protection. So, the Amorites had a hedge of protection, but then it wasted away when they broke the rules, and then Yah made another people that had a hedge of protection, and then when they did it broke the rules, it wasted away, and this is something he keeps doing, and then he destroys them all and makes a new people. I mean, Jeremiah 7:12, go to Shiloh, see what he did to them, he had a people over there, and they were wicked, and he destroyed them and took his presence from them, and so on and so forth. So when we look at Zechariah, so what we have so far is he had destroyed the vineyard, like we see in Isaiah. Yes, I will make it a ruin. It shall not be pruned or hoed, but overgrown with thorns and briars. Not to send rain upon it, or command the clouds. Then the vineyard of the Lord hosts, and the men of Judah's cherished plant, he looked upon judgment, but see bloodshed. So basically, it's be destroyed. This vineyard. No, there's also other imagery from the prophets. That's what the prophets is what John meant, or when he said Jesus talking to the Samaritan woman, John 4, that salvation comes of the ewes, that this comes from, the oracles, and the oracles talk about this eagle, the eagle being God, he plants it, in a high place, this is the remnant and what have you, and the second temple. And we see the second temple being quite uneventful until the Messiah, and then that be the culmination of everything was prophecy. Now, when we look at Zechariah 6, under the coronation, it says, silver and gold take the crown, placed on the head of Jesus, the son of Josedek, the high priest, Zerubbabel, and say to him, Zerubbabel, that's the son of David. So this is a shadow of what was really meaningful when the real son of David took his coronation, and say to him, thus says the Lord of hosts, here is a man whose name is Shoot, because the whole vine was cut off, there's from the patriarchs, from, this Davidic, Messiah is the meaning of the Messianic era and the kingdom, and how you would know it was there. And here it's saying, here comes a shoot, like a sprout, just a little bit going from the ruin. He shall build a temple of the Lord with the royal insignia. So we know that Jesus, if he's fulfilling this type, he has the temple, and we see that the temple is Jesus clearly from Mark, and that even the church is the body, and the body of Christ, which is the temple, as we read further. Now, when we look at this vine that was grown up from one person's Zerubbabel, because it had been cut down and ruined, as we saw in Isaiah, Jesus said, I am the true vine. My Father is the vine grower. So this is very significant, because this is what that shoot is. This is from him building a new nation. And he says, anyone who does not remain in me will be thrown out with a branch and wither. People will gather them up and throw them in the fire, and they will be burned. And we see that imagery talking about through the gospel. And we see in Paul's Romans 11 the vines that were cast off. Well, Jesus is saying they're thrown in the fire. And when we look here, I've told you this so that my joy may be complete. My joy in you, and you may be complete. That this is my commandment: love one another as I have loved you. That's not in the Torah. And this is supposed to be like Torah. This is supposed to be commandments being given out. This vine and everything, this nation being laid out. This is a big deal. No one has greater love than this, when you lay down your life. You are my friends. Do as I command you. I no longer call you slaves. If the slave does not know what his master is doing. So it's a big deal. Now, if we go back to Numbers 14, which I'm going to dive into pretty deep in my next video, and look at verse 12. It's I will strike them with pestilence. I will wipe them out. Then I will make of you a nation greater and mightier than they. So Moses is being told that he's going to wipe them all out, and he'll make a nation out of Moses. And, all the people that learn from Moses. So this is the same thing Jesus is being told, because, just as Zerubbabel was prophesied by Zechariah as a type, that they had all been cut off, and he would make a new nation out of Moses. So if he can make a new nation out of Moses, why can't he make a new nation out of Jesus, And so if we look at Ezekiel chapter 20, Jesus' commandment's good, but, if we look at Ezekiel chapter 20, verse 24, for they did not keep my ordinance, but despised my statutes, and desecrated my Sabbaths with eyes only for idols and their fathers. Therefore I gave them statutes that were not good, and ordinances like Moloch and all them. He gave them over to the ordinances of Moloch. So that's who they carried their Star of Remphain, and their tabernacle in the desert, and all that exile kind of stuff that they want to teach you, which is anti-Semitic libel, the wandering Yehu, which is based on Leviticus 16 and the mark of Cain. And so the real exile was only 70 years, and Esther was during that 70 years. Mordecai came back with the rest of them. And so, last but not least, I wanted to finish it up with good old Romans 11. Good old Romans 11. Now, if you know, he's talking about, as Jesus did, the natural branches being broke off. But as we had read, they was a wild, because they was acting like wild olive branches. But these wild olive branches was acting like natural branches, so they was able to be, contrary to their nature, grafted in. But the ones that were broken off, if they couldn't be grafted back in, and so they were broken off because of unbelief. But if you are because of faith, you are there because of faith. So do not become haughty, but stand in awe. For if God did not spare the natural branches, we know who that is, perhaps, we don't know, he will not spare you either. See then, and that would be if you became unbelief, because we see that he treated them like Pharaoh. God then gave them over to deep sleep. Their eyes could not see, so that he could teach a lot. The reason he did that to Pharaoh is so that the nations could see his power and what he did for Israel. In the same way, what he did for the Gentiles was supposed to be a sign, and he made the other ones blind, like the Pharaoh. So it says, see then the kindness and severity of God, severity towards those who fell, but kindness to you, provided you remain in kindness. You remember what Jesus said, love each other as I loved you. Otherwise, you will be cut off. So that is the law of the Christian, to love one another and believe in Jesus. That's the commandments. And that was always the commandments, but they wanted to worship the golden calf, so he gave them a bad law so that they would realize how guilty they were. So it's if you were cut off, here's what I want to show you. So they were branches that were cut off. It said, verse 18, do not boast against the branches, not the root. It said, do not boast against the branches. We see that they were cut off. They're not the root. We know who the root is. The root is the patriarchs. Then the vine was after Egypt. And so we know that the patriarchs was before that. And so the patriarchs were never cut off. The patriarchs were before the law of Moses. And they were under the promise. They didn't get the golden calf punishment and the curse. So it says, see then the kindness and severity of God, severity towards those who fell. So do not consider that you do not support the root. It says in the place, it says, but if some of the branches were broken off, and you, wild olives, who were grafted in their place, and have come to share in the rich root of the olive trees. So how if their branch is broken off, then how are you sharing in the root if they are the root? Do not boast against the branches. If you do boast, people always say, do not boast. You can't boast, never boast. But it says, if you do boast, so you can boast. If you do boast, consider that you do not support the root. It doesn't say you do not support the branches support you. It says the root supports you. The root is not the branches. So we're not based, so salvation comes from so-and-so, but that's not who he's talking about. He's talking about the oracles and the prophets. That they were the ones that held the oracles, but not anymore. I mean, Christians, I'm the one teaching you milk. You're getting milk from me. Like, you don't read on your own the stuff you're supposed to know. And so the Gentiles learned from you a stammering tongue, and this was just a complete failure, and it was an embarrassment. See Ezekiel 36. All the Moloch and the passing of the children. And then you thought that he commanded you in the first place. So in Jeremiah, it said that never even crossed his mind. So, anyway, peace.